Good morning and welcome back. Good to have you all here. Obviously, we have shortened periods, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time dilly-dallying, but I hope your weekends were good. As you know, we have now an extra short week. It was already a short week. Now we have shortened periods today, so it's super short. So our plan for the week is basically to continue working on the book club reading. We'll spend today and Wednesday with some time in class to read. I'm also going to introduce this new project now that you've finished up your character motive paragraph. If you didn't submit those, the character motive paragraph was due on Friday. So circle back, get that in as soon as you can, please. Let me see. Any questions for me before we jump right in? Okay. And just in case any of you are unsure about this, let me just share my screen so you can see today's schedule. It's available on Canvas, but if you want to take a picture of it, it might not be a bad idea. So we're on this middle schedule. We're here in class today until 10:41, so a little more than half an hour. That's the plan. And we are missing some people. I suspect that might be because some people might have used the wrong link. So if you know of anyone who's missing, if you have a friend who's missing, you might want to text them and say, hey, you have to go into previous meetings or use the link from the announcements. Okay, just updating the attendance. All right, so that's our plan for the week. For today, we'll start with just some leisurely book club reading for the first half of class. In the second half of class, you probably saw in my announcements, I alluded to this podcast project. It's also up on Canvas. So I'll explain the parameters of that. You could even start working on it or figuring out which group you're going to be in. But let's do our reading first. So why don't we we'll do 20 minutes of reading. So a little longer than usual. And then just, again, keep track of the progress you're making. Even though we have time off this week, I'm not going to directly say, hey, you have to read this number of pages over the break. But it's probably a good idea to just keep in mind, keep on track. It needs to be, finished by February, so you can write this paper. So if by the end of this week, by the time we return to school, you should be about halfway done. Right? So hopefully you're on track for that. Do I know which days we have off? Yes, I do. It might be useful for me to just show you a calendar so you can see this. So I'll show you this and then I'll let you read. As I'm waiting for this calendar to open, again, any questions about your books, assignments, the course, anything like that? Okay, here we go. So here we are on the 8th. So we have tomorrow's our full day. Wednesdays are early dismissal. Parent-teacher conferences are the 11th and 12th. The 15th is President's Day. The 16th, school's closed for some reason, and so we're back in the thick of things on the 17th. That's how the next couple weeks will go. Hopefully that's clear. All right, so let's do our 20 minutes of reading. I'll call you guys back in when time's up. And what I'd like to do for the remainder of class is just introduce you to this podcast project. So I am going to go over the details of it with you, but I thought rather than just reading you a list of requirements, it might be better to open up by providing you an example. I don't know if many of you listen to podcasts. I'm an avid podcast listener. I have a pretty long commute, so I have a bunch that I scroll through. Anyone out there listen to podcasts? And if so, like, what do you listen to? You could just put it in the chat. Is there any podcasts you listen to? I suspect that it's more of an adult kind of thing. People with, like, most frequently, I think people listen to them on their commutes. But I know sometimes students listen to them. Joe Rogan, yeah, he's super popular. Okay, well then, if you do listen to them, you have some concept of what they're like, and I think most people would, by this point, say that podcasts are kind of one of the most popular and emerging new forms of, communication, something that's just going to continue to grow in popularity. And they used to be this niche thing a few years ago. Now, like, every company has a podcast. Every brand, anytime someone wants to, convey some information, they'll go for podcasts. They're everywhere. They're easier to make than ever. So I think it's a valuable medium for you to have some exposure with. And if I'm not mistaken, you made podcasts last year in ninth grade. Is that correct? You did? Okay, great. So you already have some familiarity with them, so we can build on that. Okay, so let me show you the kind of end product that I'm going to want from you. This is my own podcast that I made last year with some special guest contributors. This one is about The Pedestrian, not one of the novels, but it's the same type of product. We won't listen to the whole thing, just enough for you to get a taste of it. All right, let me know if you have trouble hearing it. Hello, dear listeners. This is Mr. La Luna. Welcome to my short story podcast. Here today, we're going to be discussing Ray Bradbury's story, The Pedestrian. Joining me are two of my esteemed colleagues, experts on literature. I have with me in the studio, Miss Waltz.
Hello, 10 honors, remember me?
And also joining me is another blast from the past, Miss Howard.
Hello there.
So we're talking about The Pedestrian. It's a seemingly simple story. You really could just sum it up in a single line as someone goes for a walk and ends up getting arrested. But beneath that simplicity, there's a lot going on. It was written in the 1950s, a time where you just had the end of World War II, when in Nazi Germany, okay, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit.
Down the street. All of the city houses were dark, but this one particular house had all of its electric lights brightly lit. Every window a loud yellow illumination, square and warm in the cool darkness. And he says, that's my house. And we're left with that image of all of these dark houses down the street in this entire city. And yet his house is completely illuminated. And I think it's echoing the fact that he himself is the last person that is enlightened, right? So he internally is the last one who sees that there's more to life than what these other people have, and that is echoed in the actual, lighting up his homes.
Yeah, and that reminds. Okay, I'm just going to stop it there because we have these shortened periods. I would have played a little more for you, but you get kind of the gist of it. I thought you would get a kick out of hearing me make a podcast with your ninth grade teachers. So you're going to be doing something like this, working with partners, making a podcast where you'll share your discussions and your ideas about the book you're reading. So here are some specific requirements. And I'll also put the link to that podcast on Canvas in case you want to use it as a model. Okay, I'm calling this the Halfway Point Book Club podcast because it's at the halfway point. So you're not discussing the whole thing, just your thoughts about where you are so far. You could kind of imagine this as like a one episode in a longer podcast series about your book, and this is just the middle edition. Okay. So the goal here is to present not a big summary, but an analysis, kind of like should feel like a natural sort of discussion, as if you were producing this for a wide audience who is kind of curious about the book, maybe reading the book along with you. So for the groups, they should be between 1 and 3 people. So if you would rather do this on your own, I don't have a problem with that. I know some people just more introverted, don't want to bother with groups. They just want control of the whole thing. I'm good with that. But otherwise, you could have 2, 3 people. Also, I have 3 sections of 10 honors. All of them are going to be doing this podcast. So if you know someone in my 5th period or 6th period who you want to work with, I'm fine with you working with those people. It's all remote anyway. The only stipulation is that you all have to be reading the same book. You're all going to be talking about your ideas about that same book. So what should go into this? It should be in length about 6 to 10 minutes. It'll include a brief opening where you'll introduce yourself or yourselves and the novel, provide a short summary of what's going on. Kind of think of this like bullet points, like we've got this has happened, this has happened, this hasn't happened, but the bulk of your podcast should be discussing your thoughts, your original thoughts, kind of the analysis. This would be the body paragraphs if this were an essay instead of a podcast. So talk about the characters, what drives them, how they're changing, what's important to them, the conflicts they're facing, themes that you are seeing develop in the book so far, or other parts that stand out in whatever way. You should consider how it's written, consider the structure, how each chapter is organized, how the plot's presented to you, character development, figurative language, things like that. You could also just point out parts that you like or parts that you dislike. You could talk about the signposts from that worksheet, right? If you see any in there, you could talk about them. Just make sure that, like we've been practicing, you're using good examples and quotes to support your discussion. To wrap up the podcast, you want all of you to share the favorite part so far, and then end with a little prediction about what you think will happen in the second half of the novel. And that's the basic rundown. To make the podcast, well, there are lots of different things you can do. I would recommend that you use this app, Anchor.fm. It's a free app. You can download it on your phone. Makes it really easy to use. You can record remotely. You don't even have to be in the same room to do this. And they're going to be due on Monday, February 22nd. Obviously, we'll spend some time working on them in class. So we're just about at the end of class, so I need to wrap up. This is on Canvas, so you could look it over if you want to dive into that a little more deeply. But let me send in the chat this form. I'll also have this on Canvas. That's just a group interest form. So that's your way of telling me I want to work by myself. I want to work with a group, but I don't really care who. So just put me with anyone. Or if you have specific people in mind who you'd like to work with, tell me on that form. Okay. If you could get back to me with that form by the beginning of class on Wednesday, that would be great. If not sooner. All right. So we're at the end of the period, but does anyone have any questions on the podcast project?